life is full of change. You never know what's going to happen on the next day, the next moment. And as you all know, we had a dramatic change in our Sangha last Sunday. Has everybody heard the story of Swami's passing? Yes, okay. Then I'm just going to briefly review it just so that we can be in mind of what's taken place. Last Sunday, I myself, and for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Swami Vijay, and I was in Gurgaon, and the whole week before I had been thinking, what should I speak about on Sunday? And I didn't know what's the right subject. And I would try to open myself up to ideas on that. And about 2 days before Sunday, which would be Friday, I came up with a subject. And the subject was spiritual community. And at the Sunday satsang, what I talked about was Swami Kriyananda and the Ananda way of life, and what a meaning that has to us, the value that it has to us, the way that participation in the way that we live brings us to the very meaning of the word Ananda, joy. And I told a few stories about Swamiji and life at Ananda. And only minutes after the end of the service, according to the timing that we received from Assisi, we ended just before 11:30, and he passed at 11:30 Indian time, 8 a.m. Assisi time. At the same time in Pune, Swami Jayaji was also doing the service there. And it was, it wasn't a service, I think it was a class. And the class was on discipleship. And just at the time when somebody came to tell him, he had just finished talking about discipleship, and he had a copy of the New Path in his lap. And then he heard. And just about 6 or 7 months ago, I had an opportunity to talk with Swamiji, and at that time, he asked me to come back from America back to India. I'd been here before, some of you may not know that. I was here for 4.5 years, and then I went back to the States, and he asked me to come back and continue serving here. And so when he passed, I was doing what he asked me to do. And I felt very good about that, because it's easy to think that when there's change in life, that change means end. But the change doesn't mean end. We know in science that, even in science, there's no end. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. And we know from the ancient teachings that we follow that life itself is eternal, that death doesn't exist. It only is a kind of change. Just in the way that we're born into this world, we're then passed from this world to another world. And what that looks like, there can be quite a variety. We have in the autobiography of a yogi the chapter on the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar, where he describes the astral worlds and what it's like living in the astral realm on the other, more subtle side of the physical realm. He also talks about the causal realm, that the realm of thought only, not even light, only thought. The masters of self-realization path have brought into the world an incredible power. Kriyanandaji described it as Yogananda's ray, his ray of light that's shining into this world. And that ray is a very powerful force that comes from God Himself. The divine, infinite power, the divine, infinite joy and love sends not one, but a line of avatars to create a dramatic change in this world. And all of the disciples who have come to this path since Lahiri Mahashaya brought Kriya Yoga back in the 1800s, all of these disciples and their disciples and their friends and their families in the world have been changed by that ray of light that's come into the world through these teachings. And when Yogananda brought these teachings to the West, many people don't realize what a dramatic impact Yogananda had on America and the world. Yogananda was the most popular speaker in America during his campaign years. He spoke at the largest venues in the country, and they had sellout crowds, and they had to do more than one program sometimes. But we do know that not everybody who hears actually listens. Not everybody who is inspired for a moment actually changes their life and becomes a disciple. Well, Swami Kriyananda was one who did listen to what he heard. He read the autobiography of the yogi, and he took the next bus, almost virtually, the next bus across the United States, and in those days, that was a long trip. All by himself, 22 years old. And when he arrived, he said, "I want to be your disciple." And from that day, from that moment that Yogananda blessed him, and Kriyanandaji described that blessing as he held his finger on I think it was on his heart, and his finger vibrated for a long, long time. And Kriyananda went from being a young man of his day. He was popular in high school. He played football. He sang. He danced. It's hard to imagine. The first time we actually, I was married years ago, and at my wedding was the first time anybody at Ananda had ever danced ballroom style at a wedding. It was the first time, and the next thing we know, Swami was out on the dance floor dancing, and he took over. He was fabulous at it, and only only until he wrote the New Path did we find out that he was actually, he used to do that when he was in college. He would go out with his day to a dance, and they would dance, and they would take over the floor, and everybody would stand around and watch them dance. Who would have thought? That's unexpected, because when we met Swamiji, he was a yogi. He was in the spine. He was this, you just can't imagine him being, a regular fellow. You just can't imagine it. But when Master touched him, all of that went away. Not that it was bad, but the focus of his life, the intent of his everyday purpose was to know and to connect to God. So when we met him, when he started Ananda Sangha in the 60s, and gradually a group of people started to spend time with him. We knew him originally as a yogi, a little joyful, but a little distant. You know, he was never familiar. You'd never sit down and go, "Oh, hey, Swami, what do you do today?" Let's just sit down and chit-chat. Let's just have a good time and talk. Because Swamiji had a purpose. His purpose was that he represented Yogananda's ray. He was given the responsibility directly by Yogananda to bring these teachings to the world. And he accepted that responsibility. In spite of being thrown out of SRF, he picked himself up and he, all on his own, with God's help, just one man, he determined to do what he could do. And because of the magnetism and the spirit that he had received from Yogananda, people responded. And now, these years later, we can see that the ray of light that the Masters has sent into the world has come through Swamiji and touched literally millions of lives. Millions. Not every one of those millions has listened fully. But that light has shone incredibly brightly. And each one of us in this room has been touched by it. One of the most amazing things about being touched by a spiritual being like Kriyananda is that everyone feels touched. You don't look at the people in the group and say, "Oh, he's more touched than me. She's more touched than me." We recognize that everybody is being touched, and we appreciate it. We're not jealous. We don't say, "No, I want you to touch me more than them." Because we know that this touch comes from a place that's more than from a human being. It's more than from a personality. It's more than just a person who can tell good stories and entertain you with philosophical thoughts, because it touches you in the core of your being, in your heart. And it touches you so deeply that it's at the very essential level of who you are. And in that touching, it becomes the most dear relationship. It's very difficult to talk about because we value human love. We value the love that we experience from our parents, from our siblings, from our friends, from our spouses. On a strictly human level, it seems mean-spirited to say that in spite of all the human love, the most dear person in my life has been Swami Kriyananda. Even more dear than my children. And yet, I understand on a deeper level that it's because of that dear connection to Spirit through the path that has been given to us, I was more able to love my children on a higher level. That I wasn't just attached to them. I wasn't just their father and I told them what to do. But that I could see, through seeing more of my own spirit, because I saw Swami's spirit, I could see my children as spirit instead of as my physical progeny, and therefore I live forever through my children. No. When we heard about Swamiji's passing, of course, each in our own ways, we were shocked. It's a change. It's like in America. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tornado Alley. But people are just going about their day, and the next thing you know, the most powerful kind of storm on earth has presented itself, and it's whirling around and tearing up buildings, and people are dying. This is extremely common during certain seasons of the year, and sometimes not in season, unexpectedly. Swamiji lived on the edge of death for so many years. I don't know if you've seen there's a commercial in America, I don't know, it's called, for the Energizer Bunny for batteries. And the Energizer Bunny he just keeps going. Swamiji just kept going. And if you knew anything about his medical records, you'd know that he shouldn't keep going. He was scheduled, from a strictly physical point of view, to die 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, it's a miracle that he lived every day, and yet he went on and on. But it wasn't easy for him. You know, in spite of the fact that over the years we saw, you know, in the early years, Swamiji contained his joy. He felt that it was private. He felt that it was something sacred, which is absolutely true. But he wouldn't, you know, he never wanted to put himself in front of Master. So he held it in. But as the years passed, it grew. And it grew. And it grew. And there was a point in which he couldn't, either he couldn't or he shouldn't, who knows, but it began to come out more and more all the time, until in recent years, anytime you saw him, it didn't matter what he was doing, it didn't matter what he was talking about, it didn't matter what the circumstance was, you felt this bliss coming through his consciousness. Just to be in his presence was, of course, I was going to say, was to feel better, but most of us have felt this since we first met him. Just to be in his presence was to feel better. You didn't have to say anything. There's some magnetism that has come through him, this, you know, all from the very beginning, that just made you feel better. But it wasn't just his human personality, it was his magnetic connection to Master. And so when he did finally pass, it was a shock. It was like a storm, that tornado, and it just came. And it's the most natural thing in the world to react to a storm with alarm. But in Tornado Alley, people who understand this danger of these storms, they build these shelters underneath the ground. And so they go into the storm shelter, and no matter what happens above the earth, in the storm shelter, they're going to be safe. And this is what happens in the spiritual life. It says the more time, the more connection that we feel in our spirit, in our hearts, to God and Guru, this is our storm shelter. This is the place where nothing can touch us. And Swamiji lived in that space. His body's discomfort couldn't touch his joy, but it was like carrying, kind of dragging an anchor. It did slow him down. His body got to the point where he couldn't. Swamiji was a warrior. He was out fighting the battle, bringing the light to the world. And he didn't want to just sit in a chair and put his feet up. He just wasn't made that way. So when his body wouldn't allow him to serve in a meaningful way, the personality side of Swamiji was frustrating. It was difficult. It didn't make him moody. He didn't complain. He wasn't attached to that feeling, but that experience was there. It's so important to differentiate. A lot of times we think of great souls, great being souls that are free, living in a human form. When you come into that human form, you take on a personality, and that personality does not define you, but you still live through it. And so the personality that Swamiji experienced was frustrated, but his soul was patient, his soul was joyful, his soul was accepting, without attachment. And he said, he said to Master, he said, look, I'll stay as long as you want me to stay, but you can take me anytime. And he joked about that for years. And I think finally, we sort of said, hey, we don't want to hear you talk about that. Please don't talk about dying. We don't want to, we don't like that. But we all knew it was going to happen. Imagine when Kriyanandaji was with Master and Master passed, the dramatic change that it took in his life. But did that mean that Master was gone from this world? No. Because the very definition of a free soul is that they are identified fully with infinite spirit, eternal spirit, omnipresent spirit. There was a man at Mount Washington who used to take pictures of Yogananda, and his whole wall was filled with pictures. And one day Yogananda came in, he looked at the wall. He said, you've taken all these pictures. If you want to get to know me in meditation. And this is what Kriyananda did. He got to know Master in meditation. And by doing that, when Master passed, sure, he was sad. But he knew him in his heart already. So he knew that Master wasn't gone. Yogananda said, to those who think me near, I will be near. This is a basic principle of the spiritual life. Yogananda doesn't have any choice. Yes, it's a gift, but the truth is if you're omnipresent, you're everywhere. You can't be any more near than that. But to create the connection, we must be open to that presence. And this is what we do in the spiritual life. God is always present, but we grow in our ability to perceive and to attune to that presence. And of course, through Swamiji's life, we have all been touched in such a way as to have that experience grow within us. And that's precious. So we might think for a moment that Swamiji's passing, that would make it more difficult for that to happen. But it's the same principle. It's if we attune ourselves to spirit through the channel of Kriyananda, then we will achieve the very same result that Yogananda was saying when he told the disciple to attune to him inwardly. And this is the whole key. In the beginning we get to know the personality of our teacher, and then we sort of like them, and they become comfortable to us, and then we think that that's it, or we might easily think that that's it. That's not it. That's just that's hardly even the beginning. The beginning is when we begin to feel their presence in our hearts. And in the early years of Ananda, we saw more of Swamiji. And not everybody saw Swamiji an equal amount of time. But everybody wanted to see Swamiji an equal amount of time. And that very desire created a connection inside themselves. Anticipation, yearning is a very powerful force for motivation. If you have candy available all the time, well, you don't really desire it that much. You don't anticipate it. But if you get a touch of it, you get a little taste once in a while, and you go, wow, more of that. And this has been true for all of us, because the truth is, not a single one of us could get enough of being around Swami Kriyananda. Nobody got their fill. Nobody said, okay, I've had enough. Because the more you got of it, the more you wanted of it. Because it went to your heart, and it transformed your life. Well, this hasn't changed. There has been no change in our potential to continue to be inspired by God, who has come through our line of masters and their representatives, Swami Kriyananda. So it would be a real mistake to think that the touch that you've received is now closed. But there is a change that has taken place. It's so easy when you've got someone around, even if you only see them once in a while, to say, oh, they're around. And you kind of relax and take it easy. Now we have to pay attention even more to keeping the connection open. You see, over the years at Ananda, we all saw Swamiji less and less and less. Only the few people who really were in his day-to-day taking care of his world, they saw him on a daily basis. That was a handful of people. Everybody else saw him once a year, twice a year. A little variation, but not all that much. But what we had to, so each of us in our own way, over the years, have had to do the very thing that you need to do today, is to acknowledge that connection that you have in your heart, and then make a commitment to growing it, to connecting to it, to recognizing it, to realizing that physical presence is not necessary. And that, in fact, not that we wouldn't want it, but that it can be a distraction. It can't keep you from paying attention to the more important part of the relationship. So now we don't have a choice. Although we could worship pictures, we could worship his books, we can listen to his music, and we might think that only in those physical experiences we're with Swami. It's true, we are, in a certain way, in his vibration. And it's an excellent and recommended practice to do that, but don't do it just on the surface. Do it in your inner being, and connect it to your meditations. Connect it to your deepest relationship with Infinite Spirit. We don't want to just worship Swami's life. We don't want to just say, well, that was just so incredible. Oh, wow, I really admire that man. That isn't what he came for. He doesn't care if we like what he did. He wants us to change our lives because of what he did. And he invites each and every one of us to change the lives of others if we feel inspired to do so. The most powerful way that we can change the world is to change ourselves. And the most powerful way that we can change ourselves and change the world is to attune to Spirit as Spirit has come to us. They say that when the disciple is ready, the Guru appears. But we have to recognize that relationship, and then we have to enter into it, commit ourselves to it, and expand it. Now, not every disciple is a minister. Not every disciple has the same way of expanding that relationship. But according to your nature, according to your interests, according to your inspirations, every experience in life, and this is one of the most, to me, one of the most fabulous things about spending time with Swamiji, was that in every moment, you just didn't know when some pearl of truth, some special spiritual expansion, understanding would take place. And you knew it was going to happen. You just didn't know exactly when, because it always did. So you would sit in anticipation, and just sitting in that environment was beneficial. But we also got the added benefit is if you were paying attention, some subtle truth would become apparent. Some greater understanding, some broader connection to higher consciousness would present itself. That hasn't changed. God is present with us in our lives every day, all the time. And if we bring that connection to the relationship in that day-to-day, then it becomes much more and more powerful because we begin to understand it, work with it. I encourage you to experiment with this in your life. Act as a channel consciously to bring the light of the Masters into the world. You don't have to tell people you're doing it, but do it. When you see someone in need, send the energy through you to them. I was standing in line at the airport to when we were leaving Rome, and there was a man standing next to me. I've never met this man before. And I turned to him, and I thought, well, now here's a person. I kind of feel the vibe, feel what he feels like, and go, he feels pretty good to me. I wonder if he's open to a conversation, a meaningful conversation. Let me see. And so then I said, oh, hi, where are you from? And I entered into a conversation that I didn't force it, but I allowed it to move towards, consciously, towards autobiography of yoga. And by the end of the conversation, I had told him about autobiography of yoga. And there are all kinds of interactions that we can have. You don't have to be a great teacher to do that, but you have to be open to it. The reason I bring this up is for a number of reasons. One is because it's good for us to pay attention like that. And the channel is blessed. When we act as a channel for spirit, we are also blessed. Now, we don't want to do it just so that we'll feel good, but we want to do it because we like feeling connected to spirit. Simultaneously, this is how the light spreads in the world. This is all that Kriyananda did. He just had a little conversation with each and every one of us. He might have done it in bulk. He might have met a few more people. But it all comes down to this personal exchange of vibration and consciousness, and acting consciously as a channel for God and gurus. When we live this way, we not only improve ourselves and we improve the world and all of the people that we meet, but we stand in tribute to Swamiji. It's one of the ways that we can say thank you. It's one of the ways that we can actually really do something that would personally please him. I mean, to the man who has everything, what do you give him? A piece of fruit? He can buy a piece of fruit anytime he wants. A watch, a camera, a house, a boat, property. Swami could have any of those things, but he didn't care about any of those things. What he cared about was sharing the light. So when we carry on that tradition, we are helping him to fulfill his mission. And the thing is it's so easy to think of it all as separate. Well, there was Larry Mahashai, then there was Sri Teshwar, then there was Yogananda, and that each one was separate. No, it's all one flow of light into the world. And each and every one of us will be as vital a part of that flow as we choose to be, because God will never force us to do so. But if we choose to, then we can enter into it and then invite God, invite the Masters, invite Swamiji, however you feel to use you as a channel to bring the light into the world. And again, it's according to your nature, your interest, to the guidance that you get. But when we live this way, we begin to free ourselves from the ego's view of living for the little self. And we begin to live more and more in the soul's view, living for God. This is the story of the life of the devotee. Yogananda Ji was one day giving a talk, and towards the end of his life he had problems with his legs, and he needed help getting in and out of the car. A couple of the men helped him, and in that moment, I think it was Swamiji, as I remember, and said, "Sir, thank you for all that you do for us." And he said, "God helping God, God serving God, that's His plan. This is God's plan. This is the story of life, God serving God. When we enter into it consciously, we honor it. And through that honoring, we experience the natural state of soul, which is unhonored, which is sinless." So, Swami's passing was celebrated in Assisi with tears, but if you were to compare the tears to the joy was much larger. Because we don't know exactly the circumstances that the spirit that we define as Kriyananda is. But every ounce of our being tells us that He's in bliss. And for that, we are in bliss. That makes us happy. For all He's done for us, let us not hold Him back with our sorrow. Have your sorrow, but then move on and build the bliss. Connect to the bliss and build the bliss. This is how we can honor His life. This is what He would want us to do. And this is what will be done. And in this group of people is extraordinary to see the joyful determination. Swamiji hasn't been involved in the day-to-day running of the community for many years. So nothing has changed in terms of the structure and the continuance of the service that we do, and the classes, and everything's the same. But it's going to go to a deeper level. And it's going to require each of us who has been given the honor and the responsibility of representing Swamiji as ministers. It's going to take us stepping up, and we need your help too. You have to step up. Because this is a family. And this is what was so wonderful about the gathering. People came from all over the world. People who had met Swami once, people who had known him for 45 years. And in that environment, we're all equal. We're all brothers and sisters on the path. We're all disciples. And in that spirit, we hugged and we greeted each other, and we celebrated the good times. We laughed at the challenging times. But underneath it all was this, as I started, this recognition that this soul that we call Kriyananda, that is now elevated into the joy, has been the most dear person that we have lived with. And for that there is no way to express thanks sufficiently for that experience, except to continue it. Continue it. Keep growing it. That's his legacy. That's what we want to do in order to serve everyone's benefit on all levels. And this is really what we did. Swamiji's physical form was in a casket, and we each were able to go up and touch him and to offer flowers and to offer our appreciation. And it was very spontaneous. You know, people, it wasn't like there were ushers. It was like being in India. It was like everybody did whatever they wanted, but they did it with respect. You know, Indians don't like to get in line. They just like to go and merge like the cars on the street. When you drive in America, if you got in one of these traffic jams the way you have them in India, people with gridlock, you wouldn't never get out of it. But in India, it doesn't matter what you do, how crazy it looks, somehow people just wiggle, 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 and there you go, it's great. And this is what happened, is people would come up and they would just, you know, do what they felt to do, respectfully. And we had people who were with Swamiji's body 24/7. So there was always someone who was there to make sure everything behaved itself, and that his form wasn't alone. That we were standing sentinel in this time of transition, and so in the temple, the temple in Assisi is this large temple dome, and it was up on the altar, and you know, flowers everywhere. It was just very beautiful, and then after on Wednesday we had a service. They had already done an astral ascension service, but then we just had the international funeral service, and it was just, you know, the family getting together and sharing a few reminiscences and reminding us of the very things that we're talking about right now, and to as a group to say goodbye to his form, to the era of Swami in the body, not goodbye to the spirit. Asha said it in a very beautiful way. She said that she was in the habit, every morning she had a picture of Kriyanandaji on her wall. And every morning, as soon as she'd woke up, she'd see this picture and she'd go, "Hello, sir. Hello, sir." So the day after his passing, she went, "Good morning, sir. Oh, things are a little different now, aren't they?" It's not that he wasn't there, it's just that he wasn't in body. But he was still present to say hello to him. And it was a beautiful way to recognize this inner relationship. And so we have the service, and of course there was music. Swami's music was played, and in this way we shared the moment together. And during the week we had a number of satsangs where a few people, which everybody couldn't share, there was too many people, but a few people would say a few things. We had a concert of just of music one evening, and of course, what do you do when you're in Italy? You eat. They, at the retreat there, they serve 3 meals a day, and it's, you know, absolutely fabulous food. And so, and Italians, like Indians, they love to talk. They love to share. They're very social. And so, of course, in Italy, they have silence. For example, at breakfast, they have silence at the beginning of the meal. But then rather than having silence the whole time, because they can't contain the Italians, they do it halfway. And then they have a reading, and then you can talk. And so, but sometimes they talk in the beginning too. to it. They can't help themselves. But there's this spirit of family. There's this spirit of we're just one big extended spiritual family. And it is just so beautiful. The way of life, the community, the spiritual community way of life. People don't even imagine how beautiful it is. And that you can have it today. This is what we're doing in Pune. We can create this in Delhi. We have it in cities, not just in the country, where people live together. This is a way of life that you don't have to wait until you retire and find a peaceful place in the country. That we can support each other as much or as little as we want. Each of us can choose. We have members who've been members for 40 years who we only see once a year. And we have members who are there every day. Each of us gets to choose. But the key is to choose it, to enter into it, to participate in it. And to the extent that we participate, that's how benefited we will become. And so, the time in Assisi was a time of appreciation, but it was also a call to action. And I think that we all felt that we were going home motivated to continue to spread the light, to continue to expand what has been started, and that nothing is going to stand in our way. That we will not accept not giving it our best effort. We don't know what the future holds in detail, but we do know that if we're there, we're going to be serving. We're going to be sharing. And so please have no concern about us not being here next week, next month, next year. We'll be here. We're here, and the song is growing in the last few years more than ever. It's so beautiful. Having just arrived fairly recently from the States, and to see your faces, you're just what I feel when you were chanting with us, that we chanted today. There's a spirit there. There's an enthusiasm. There's energy. This is how you become successful spiritually. This is fun and enlightening. So I bring tidings of joy, really. The joy that Swami is with us in our hearts, and also to be drawn upon as the universal power of the light of this ray coming into the world. It's accessible to us 100%. Have the doubt of that. And let us move forward together in this spirit, and smile. Because this is our path. Doesn't matter what happens, we smile. Dig a ditch, smile. Burn the chapatis, smile. Get the flat tire, smile. Because it's all from God. It's all an incredible journey for each of us. And underneath it all is the joy and the love of God.